Welcome back. I hope your break was satisfying. At the outset of this session, which is my last one with you, I just want to mention a couple things. First of all, I have to admire APA's commitment to trying to do this important work for what I consider to be the most important course in the psychology curriculum. The attention that we need to pay to this course is important, in part because it can have such a huge impact on public perception of what psychology is and what psychologists do. And so taught well, this course can be huge in correcting some misperceptions. In addition, if this is your first outing with the psychology teaching community, let me extend a warm welcome to you on behalf of what is an enormous network of people who care about psychology and psychology students, where I think the motto is steal from the best. People in this network, whether you're officially part of the Society for Teaching of Psychology, Division II of APA, or you run into colleagues at any of our various teaching conferences throughout the country, you will find no more welcoming and warm group of generous people who are interested in trying to help you succeed. So you may want to consider, if you're not a member of STP, you may want to hop on to teachpsych.org and check out that. And in the meantime, you also may want to look, if you haven't yet, at the enormous number of resources that the APA Education Directorate has made available for people who care about teaching. One last plug, the annual conference on teaching sponsored by STP is coming up in October in Pittsburgh. I'm planning on being there, and if you are there too, please come up and introduce yourself to me so that you can extend the network even further. This is how friendships are born. So in our last session, what we're going to do is talk about how do you get from all these component parts to something that is workable for the overlords that you're serving, including yourself and your students, and how do you judge the success of what you're doing? So I consider this section to be referred to as drafting your tentative plan. And in our later breakout experience, this time it's going to be a pair share. We're going to match you up with one other person so that you have a little bit more concentrated opportunity to talk about what you intend to do based on what you're learning. And you can give feedback to the person that you're partnered with about their plans as well, extending your own teaching network. Okay, so where we've been, we have reviewed general assessment principles. We've outlined the specific IPI transformational outcomes. We've addressed various teaching exemplars related to IPI outcomes. And in our last session, we looked at variable approaches to developing rubric and feedback that's usable in helping students develop. Now, the focus here, we're going to be shifting a little bit more from traditional classroom assessment, where the focus is on improving the student, to program assessment or classroom assessment, where what you're trying to do is determine whether or not you're meeting your goals. Our outcomes, we want to identify why we need to be public in what we do. We've had a long tradition in higher education of having academic freedom be the mantra that we cite, which allows us to close the door and not worry about what's going on outside the door, because you and your students create your own self-contained community, and those days are over. The thrust of the assessment movement is that we need to be public about what we do. One of the reasons why it's important to be able to share what we do, to have evidence to support that we believe students are learning. I don't think it's, as a psychologist especially, I'm not offended if someone asks for evidence to back up the claims I'm making about what students are able to do. We're going to look at the ethical obligations that are entailed in assessment, and we're going to describe how to evaluate whether or not what you're doing is successful. If it's not, there'll be some tips on how to rebound from those not yet experiences on your design part. And then we're going to strategize about how to communicate what you've been finding about how students are learning to students and other stakeholders who are interested in your performance as a teacher. We'll do a little bit of pair sharing in developing the transformation plan. We'll end up identifying or re-identifying sources that will help you with the design. Then we'll bring it all together to see what are the takeaway messages from the 4 hours that you've basically been in assessment boot camp. But let's start with this wonderful story from A Man for All Seasons. Playwright Robert Bolt wrote it, and award-winning teacher, Canadian Nick Skinner, resurrected it in a talk, and I believe I've heard my mentor, Bill McKeechee, cite this example as well. In the example, Sir Thomas More assures his protege that that if he becomes a teacher, he's going to be outstanding. But if I were, demurs the young man, who would know it? More replies, you, your friends, your students, God. Not a bad audience, that. Now, I love that snapshot of how people will know if you're a good teacher, that in God's eyes, in your students' eyes, in your friends, if they tolerate you talking about the achievements that you have in the classroom. But really what program or course evaluation allows is it allows you to go public about what you're doing. And I think that's to everyone's advantage, given that college professors are no longer deemed as among the most worthwhile pursuits, where we sometimes are looked at askance because we work only a 9-hour week. We only teach 3 classes, so that translates to 9 hours, and what do you do with the rest of the time? You've probably had those kind of discouraging conversations. So one of the reasons I'm such a big fan of assessment is it allows a public conversation, and even more, it allows some important exchange from people who are being successful at what they do. So if we consider ethical obligations in assessment, I consider that this is a 3-stage process, that before an assessment takes place, it's reasonable to design assessment that is specific to a learning outcome that you have promised in whatever materials you put together that will guide the students in their navigation of your course. As you're looking at assessment, it's also important to take into account, especially the kind of movements that have been generating a lot of heat of late, to make sure that we're being as fair-minded as possible and not privileging one group over another in the kind of learning opportunities they're getting. Do our assessments reflect that? Are we careful to make sure that it's a level playing field? During an assessment, an ethical obligation is to make sure that you're doing all you can to foster students' best performance. I think it's reasonable for you to be encouraging to students and to be available for questions. And I've always thought that faculty who turn their tests over to TAs or someone who is proctoring an exam sort of miss the boat of assuring students that you're in the boat with them, that you want them to succeed, that you're willing to try to clarify what it is you're asking if there is any confusion, because you want them to succeed. And then after an ethical obligation is to score quickly and offer generic feedback quickly, especially if you've got an oral performance going on. It's painful if students do an oral performance and then the teacher says, I'll let you know what your grade is later or how you did. We really want to be able to have on hand some favorable commentary that addresses what the student achieved, as well as some beginning developmental feedback. And if you adopt an assessment-oriented strategy and the students have the rubric, the students themselves can be adept at providing feedback to their peers, even at the intro level. What I especially like about that is the skill building that does in developing communication skills and interpersonal sensitivity, in understanding that if you're being asked for constructive feedback, saying, wow, that was awesome, is not constructive feedback. Put some meat behind it, give me an example. Getting students to be focused and helpful like that early on can only strengthen our classes over time. Now we come to the dicey business of how do you know if you're successful? There are 2 different strategies that are used when we're trying to determine if something has succeeded in meeting the outcome that you wanted. And that is to identify some target level of performance that you expect from the group. And a standard in the assessment community is if you're turning this into some sort of graded experience, that the average score achieves at least a 70%. That doesn't, you're not guaranteeing that everybody's passing, but you're saying that that the average score certainly meets minimum standards. If you are in a situation where you're being asked to distinguish high flyers versus just competent people, you can move the benchmark to a 90% performance. But the point is, you control the level at which you say this is successful. And again, most accrediting bodies say if you achieve a 70% success level, that's probably pretty good, and that might have bragging rights. On the other hand, if this is something, if the assessment is something that you do semester in and semester out, you can also specify that what you're trying to do is improve. So you don't have to achieve the 70% level. In fact, if you have a baseline of success where the outcome is 50%, you can say, okay, next time we're going to increase that by 10%, or next time we're going to hit the 70% marker. So one way or the other, you can specify a target average score, or you can specify a growth rate that you think is reasonable. And in most cases, what you want to do is confer with your assessment overlords on campus to see which ones will be most satisfying if they're asking for those kind of data. So as we evaluate the success of a project, here are some questions to ask. Is the rubric specific to what you're asking? Is it specific to the activity that you formed? Or have you sort of gone well beyond expectations and even instructions so that you're assessing things that students weren't expecting? Are the guidelines clear and comprehensive? Does it address everything that you'll be looking at? Is the language straightforward given the nature of the learner that you're dealing with? College freshmen are just learning college level vocabulary. And so usually if I'm introducing words that are even 3 or 4 syllables long, I'll refer to those as college educated words and automatically offer a translation to get students comfortable with the fact that I don't expect them to have acquired a college education vocabulary already, but that I'm happy to help them build that. And again, in what you're designing, have you designed it in a way that the materials and the expectations are free from cultural and other kinds of bias? Now, here you've designed a great assessment, you've administered it, you get back results, and wow, it's a misfire. And I can share with you, even though I've been in the assessment business now for 40 years, I had that experience just last semester when I redesigned the intro assessment strategy for problem solving. Oh my, it was terrible. The results did not reach 70% target, and I had some splaining to do. So when results come back that you don't want, there are things that you can do. You have to recognize that the flaw can exist in one or more places in the process. First of all, you might not have taught it well. This might be a true reflection that when you were going over the concepts that were related to what's being assessed, that it wasn't clearly done. And so asking students to apply the concepts then was not going to pay off. Second, and we know this well, post-COVID especially, that students can be pretty lackluster in their performance. In fact, I don't know if many of you saw the rather moving essay that Brad Ray posted just last week. I think it was on Facebook and a few other places, about leaving the teaching profession because he can no longer fight against students wanting to be on their cell phones instead of being participants in the learning climate that he created. We are up against it. We are up against the distractions of the cell phone. God bless the cell phone, but I think sometimes it's the spawn of the devil. That we have to do what we can to make sure students are engaged with us. And by all reports, COVID has really diminished students' ability to be socialized to a face-to-face higher education classroom, and it may call on us to be even more inventive and creative in trying to capture student interest. And then a third problem area is your assessment may just not be right. In my case, this past year, the assessment wasn't right. We didn't prepare the intro teacher specifically for the concepts that the test was going to be measuring. And so obviously we got back results that indicated it looked like the students weren't learning anything. Well, I know they were, but I know the assessment and the preparation just was insufficient this round. So we're correcting that. If you have to report your results to an overlord, so for example, at my place, my gen ed assessment report is due in about 10 days. There are some things that you need to keep in mind. First of all, not everyone is a psychologist. Most people are not psychologists, including assessment experts. And so when you're writing up your results, you need to write it with an eye toward people who don't understand standard deviation. The simplest statistics possible, percentages achieved, graphs of growth rates, those are the kinds of things that most assessment overlords will respond to. In your report, you always want to lead with the strengths of what your assessment results found. Clearly, there's got to be something good about it, even if you discovered that the assessment strategy that you tried didn't work and you know why. That's a good assessment outcome. And so one should not be shy about reporting what looks on paper to be failure, as long as you position it within a continuous improvement framework. You want to establish improvement goals based on whatever the data reveals. So in some case, that may be, let's start over and do a new assessment, or that may be, we need to standardize a teaching module, or that may be, I need to slow down when I'm talking about statistics. Wherever you see the flaw, you report that as a closing the loop function, and that's what assessment specialists are looking for. If this is at all confusing, you need to find a mentor, whether it's somebody who's officially part of the assessment process on your campus, or just a senior faculty member who's been around for longer and who's reasonable assessment enthusiast, to help you troubleshoot what may be going on in the process that you've enacted. The point is that what you want to do is emphasize you're in it for the pursuit of that perfect course. As we talked about last week, you're never going to get there, but the fun is trying to get there. And if you adopt a continuous improvement strategy, then the blips along the way should not be harmful to you. All right, so what we're going to do for our breakout is encourage you to have some good quality time with one other person. And in that breakout session, I think what we're going to do is have that be about 20 minutes long. That'll give us a good amount of time to process what you've discovered and what questions you may have. In the breakout session, what we want to do is we want you to explain where you think you stand currently on what you want to do, either to build your course as a transformative experience, especially where you're going to incorporate some active learning strategies, or if you're going to retrofit your course because you're a seasoned teacher and you can see the connection between IPI and the kinds of things that you've done before. What improvements are you planning on making? And what we're asking you to do is take turns explaining, here's what I think, here's where I am, here's where I want to go. Get feedback from the person who is assigned to be your partner, and then change roles. And then with whatever leftover time you have, if you prepare any additional questions that can enlighten us regarding assessment bootcamp issues, that will help us finish up our 4-hour tour of duty.